Good evening, good evening. Bix Weir, roadtoruta.com with your evening horn of beer. Horn of beer tonight. Cheers, everybody. Everybody's clapping right now, right? I hope so. Are we having fun tonight? I didn't hear you. Are we having fun tonight? Yes, we're having fun tonight. I'm so excited right now. We have a special guest who flew in via computer pixels to talk with us tonight about the future, what the future looks like, where it's going to come. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason I understood Bitcoin earlier than a lot of people, the reason I got in and I'm so passionate about it, Mr. Clif High is in the house. Let's hear it for Clif.
Yeah.
There's Clif. Clif, welcome to the party. How are you?
Doing fine, doing fine. I'm at least still sober.
Well, yeah, we fixed that long ago. Clif, thank you so much for coming. I know it's last minute. I reached out. I said, hey, can you talk to our folks? We're going to have a room full of crazy Clif High lovers, and they all want to know about what's going to happen in the future. So I know you have a lot of notes back there. I'm really excited about that. But I did want to say before we start, this to date is still my favorite report, the Soaring 20s. The Soaring 20s is an amazing report. If you guys don't have it, this was published in December of 2017. And all I do is I take, when it says 2018, I take it out and put 2020 in it because I think things just got shifted a couple years and it reads beautifully with 2020 in it. I want to talk to Clif and I want him to tell all of us what he sees in the future, and if he could touch on some of our favorite subjects like Litecoin, since we're at Litecoin conference, and maybe silver, and then obviously what our future looks like. Clif, take it away.
Hey, Guy. Curiously, I mean, totally unknown to you, I've worked for the last 2 days on the data set that produced that report, as well as the one before that, extracting out all the long-term data. And then I had Igor load the saved components of those data sets and ran another routine to extract some of the stuff I just ignored in the past because it's now much more pertinent.
That's awesome.
And in the process, I'll tell you that I've discovered a curious correlation. I have no understanding of its meaning yet, but I've discovered a curious correlation between significant data sets and time, especially years, that are odd numbered, but that odd number is of a type that is a base for an even number ending in 0. So in other words, 7 is an interesting odd number, but when doubled, it goes to 14. But we've discovered that there's this really interesting clustering effect of data sets that around 5, for instance, because when it's doubled, it goes to 10. So any odd number that directly doubles into an even number ending in 0 seems to have this weird propensity to collect interesting data sets around it, right? And so a lot of the large data sets that we were dealing with for that report for Soaring 20s, much of those sets actually formed in 2015. And turns out 2015 was a big year for all kinds of clustering of data that is now panning out. And of course, you know, timing is a bitch, and that's where we're at, right? A lot of it is actually panning out now, as opposed to the original timing sequences I used. But anyway, yeah, so I went through all of that data, looking at some of our old familiar themes and re-examining some of our more favorite themes with a little bit more detail. And so I've got some dates. I'm assuming that the new dating that I've been using for that report for the Soaring 20s, as well as the one before it, the Sci-Fi World, back to the Sci-Fi World report, is the most accurate one I've got at the moment. But anyway, so what I did was to look at 2 complete clustering cycles, and that's about 15 years. Okay, so every 15 to 18 years, the world seems to settle out of what had been the problems of the past and go into a new cycle. And so we could say, for instance, that the data clustering of 2005 created the crises 2 years later, 2007, 2008. but the data clustering of 2005, those sets are going to all pan out by about 2020. And the data clustering in 2015 is all going to pan out by about 2030. And so we get a big flurry of themes, if you will, and then those themes express themselves however they will express themselves, but they appear to have a period that's about 15 years in length.
So is that it's basically, we could take some old reports and shift them forward 2 years or 3 years?
You can, from the period of time that the data pollution really started, which is 2013, that Gaia came on with all of its bullshit, okay? And that's when the data pollution really started out. We also noticed that the further impact about 2014 on the timing, as the early parts of the now censorship bloom started to be put into effect, right? Because it was about 2014 that the US took back some of the technology that we'd given to China that they used to build their social credit system, and they started applying it to us guys. So that's true. So many of the long-term predictions or forecasts were between 18 months and 2 years off in terms of where they're going to show up. Some are actually themes that will show up over the next 15 years. So any of those times that we overlapped, where the forecast would overlap, say, the year 2015 from, say, 2013. So in 2013, our data sets were picking up some of the long-term themes that will play out between 2015 and 2030. Our problem at the time was we couldn't tell that those were long-term metrics, if you will. And so I had tendency to think of them as like events that would show up within that 2 year period of time. And indeed, the language shows up, and now we see that it's ballooning and it's growing, and it's going to be one of these long-term play-out kind of things. And so the problem from seeing it from our perspective in the presence and looking at data that's suggesting of something in the future is that we can't tell. Our view is very two-dimensional because we can't get any real feeling for the size of what we're dealing with in terms of how it's going to play out, for the energy that will actually manifest in it. Well, all we really know at the time that we get those data sets is that there's enough energy around the meme to bring it forward in a prescient manner, at least to some degree. So I can get into the emotion aspects of it and all of the details, but it's not necessary at this point. It'll prove itself out over these next few years or not. Okay, so I think sci-fi world is really manifesting, and I think that we have evidence now that we've passed the extreme of global warming, and that extreme being the outcry that it's going to kill us all in 12 months or whatever the hell it was, right? Okay, this is a huge emotional outcrying and so forth, signifying absolutely nothing other than the zenith of that emotion. And now we're going to go back into reality, so to speak, as we deal with the actual underlying climate events and not the narrative and the hyped up hysteria and so on. And so what I've done is, in connection with your theme of your show, is to split things out into a versus, okay, into a binary interplay of opposites, because that's much of my work: building tension, release tension. Release tension can be good, can be bad. You can be releasing of the tension and crying because they survived the surgery, or you can have the release of the tension and be crying because they did not. Okay, the release is all we can see in the data sets. We can't tell what was the actual cause. Sometimes we get little hints. However, I can frame the next 2 cycles here of 15 years each, more or less, in these larger themes, because those are visible at the moment. We're even interacting within them on our daily lives, right? And so one of the primary ones is control versus freedom. All right, and that's our playing out in a huge way globally now, as we see it's just erupting everywhere. But what I want to point out is that I don't think that this is organic. Okay, I don't think that these eruptions of protests and fighting and the constant squabbling and fighting on the internet and all of that exacerbation of emotion, I don't think any of it is organic to humans. I think it's all a reaction on the part of our species to these unknown energies from space that are also affecting our weather. Okay, and so we have to live through these energies and adapt. And many people will not. Many people are going to just go fritzy, crazy, and shoot themselves or shoot somebody else because they just can't deal with the energy. They can't ground it out of their system, etc. And so I think that we really need to examine ourselves and our actions relative to the idea that we're being influenced by things that are not within our control, and that these influences are not necessarily in our best interest. They are in the best interest of bringing out large amounts of karma, okay? Because when you go batshit crazy because your whole nation is wrapped up in an energetic frenzy, and all of the herd of your species is just vibrating too much to deal with, your mind will latch on something and it will say, aha, if only I kill those other people, then my suffering will end, okay? And that's not the case. Our suffering continues to 2038 through 2041. Okay, that's when the energies that are currently causing this ramp up of binary emotions in people and the belief mind latching onto those emotions, that's when these energies wane off according to our data sets. I think that that's fairly accurate. There's reasons to suspect that this is accurate because the data sets were so accurate in the late 90s in projecting that we would encounter this period of time very deliberately, or very explicitly stated within the data sets were the unknown strange energies from space, yada, 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 drove everybody crazy with the constant repetition. And yet now it makes a whole lot of sense because we're living in it, right? And where you'll kill your neighbor metaphorically online just because they refuse to believe as you believe. And, so we're in a really rough period of time, and it'll be very terrible to get through. It may end our species as a civilization, may end the civilization of our species at this point. Our current global civilization may end in these next 15 to 30 years if we don't get our shit together and start thinking appropriately about what's happening to us.
So are we going to get our shit together?
To be determined.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't give you, as we get closer to 2038 here, let me angle us down a bit so that we can see some of that, okay? There we go. As we get closer to 2038 here, my ability to extract out details that give me an idea of what's gonna happen diminish greatly, okay? They actually diminish greatly beyond the length of the long-term data forecast within the sets. So our data cuts itself in half in the first 19 months. It cuts itself in half in the next 8 months. It cuts itself in half after that in the next 4 months, etc. So that you just have this very narrow view of, so we're on the fat end of the wedge relative to the data, and we're looking down trying to determine what it is we're looking at. So the perspective, the angles are very bad all the way around. So I can't say, Bix, this is up to us. This is karma expressing itself, and we're living in that now. And so whether any individual survives to 2038 is their own individual karma and the circumstances of the collective karma in which they find themselves. Whether we all as a species make it that far is going to be the sum, it's going to be the result of the sum of those individuals that survive the madness, okay? So if enough humans come through the other side, having worked their way through, working their own energies and so on, and arrive to 2038, then our species will survive. If further beyond that, enough of them do it along the way and take people with them and convince them that this is going on and get them to do these things, et cetera, then our civilization may survive. But at the moment, the way these things go, it is stacked against us. But that's the nature of karma, okay? Karma doesn't work unless your life is at risk in that moment, okay? If you know you're going to survive, big deal,
why do
right?
it?
Right. When I was trapped in the middle of the river and the life raft had collapsed around my legs and was pinning me up against the log jam in the Nisqually River, and the water was pouring over me so fast and I'm freezing and I know I've got like 30 more seconds to survive, you just don't know. And I did survive, and I thought I might survive, but it's only doing stuff in that moment that allowed me to be here now. Okay. Right. So what we do now will determine whether you and I are talking in 2038. Also my genetics, but that's a separate issue.
So real quick on our chances to survive better when you talk about the difference between control and freedom. Is it the freedom side that gives us more chance to survive? We
won't survive in the control side. Okay, so let me describe the actual end sort of result of all of this, right? We're living in a situation right now where someone can come on up to you and say, the science is settled. You're not allowed to say anything about climate. It's going to kill you in 18 months or whatever is their death thing, right?
Yep.
That's control. That's static. That's a fixed idea that is trying to wage itself against a dynamic universe. All right? Now, the failure here is that the fixed idea does not examine itself against that dynamic universe, because if it did, it would come to the conclusion that nothing fixed will ever survive in a dynamic universe. That's just the nature of it. We're dealing in a universe of change. Unless you accept that, then your thinking falls into the static category and it'll always fail. And if you're living by that thinking, you will fail as well, and you will likely die, as will those individuals around you. So that's where we're at. So someone who comes along and says, you can't criticize these individuals because of X, Y, and Z, they're trapped in a static belief mind that the believing mind has to continually reinforce itself, or you fall out of belief mind. And belief mind is like a subset of ego, so to speak, in that there's a little awareness that it's in it and it doesn't want to leave it. It's a comfortable way to live. People that are in belief mind are generally happy. You know, the nut jobs chanting at the airport are having a good time. That kind of thing. Those people trying to get you into their cult are having a good time. They're in belief mind. They can't understand why you wouldn't want to be in their belief mind as well. Problem with it is that belief mind essentially ignores reality. And you can ignore reality as long as you want, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality. And that's where we're at right now. So what I wanted to point out here in our little discussion, and let me see if I can angle that a little bit better. Okay, so 2020, we now have language out and about in official government circles that is talking about 2020 as year zero. Now, what does the USA government, I'm not talking about any other government, just USA government, what do the various parts of the USA government mean by year zero in this context? Well, it turns out that they mean that in 2020, the whole planet will not produce enough proteins, fats, and carbohydrates, especially carbohydrates, to meet demand, to meet global demand. And they're talking about it, if you go into some of these things, some of these state agents or some of these government agencies, they're talking about it at a level of there won't be enough XYZ fish produced for the larger fish that eat those fish to be able to eat. So the famine aspect of it is going to be pan-species wide. So we're seeing some effects of it now, and they're talking about it in some of the discussions about the insect deaths. Most of the species on the planet are insects. 85% of all the species on the planet are insects. There aren't as many plants as there are insects, basically, even, right? So more insects than anything. And insects, therefore, are a good bellwether, a good indicator of what's going on. And insects have been dying off for years and years and years, along with the, not only because we're trying to kill them, Monsanto kind of stuff, but also because universe is not kind to them. And so there have been huge extinction rivules, I think they call them, that are running through ecosystems where one subspecies of insect dies off and everything that lived on it is also starting to die off. Those that can't adapt, or which most insects can't, they're dying off even more rapidly, and so on and so on. And so we're at that stage right now. So the government is thinking of year zero as 2020, not because there's a zero in there, but because that's the year that we produce zero excess calories on this planet. And that, if we think about it, is our fulcrum. We lever upon the year 2020 and our and the ongoing famine that begins from that point. And so here's what we're faced with. We're faced with control versus freedom. Okay, as we get into this period of time from 2020, and we're in there now in 2019, we might as well really face it. We're living in that realm. We can't escape what's coming to us. It's going to run into us in just a few weeks. Well, along with that, we see some of your favorite subjects here, the dollar, the euro, and the yen, meaning our fiat currencies versus crypto. And really, it's crypto and other commodities, okay? And we need to get into that later on. But so this is an expression of it. The crypto is on the freedom side. Survival is on the freedom side. The ability to think, the ability to get adequate calories to make your child grow up enough to be able to think rationally about their own situation so that they don't die when they're 20 just because their government decides that that shall be so, right? That's the kind of thing we're facing. We've always lived with nasty governments. We might as well just admit this is our reality because we're now faced with all of these things. The beauty of the situation is that during these huge levels of planetary species-wide crises, governments fail. They collapse. And that's what's happening here in the United States. And we can get into the details of that even more later on, should you want to. But during that period of time, the collapse of the control structure is the opportune time for people that are aware of what's going on to make their move, right? Just like trading cryptos, you know, a company is going to be facing a big crises, you know, that's the opportune time, up or down, short, long, it doesn't matter, but that's the opportune time to move. Mm-hmm. We're in one of those periods of time, right? Just incredibly dynamic period of time at this moment. So getting back to your earlier question, will we survive? I have every fucking intention of doing so, okay? And I'm quite certain there's a bunch of other old, mean, rat bastard people like myself that intend to survive. I'm in. Right. So, hey, I like struggle, you know, and I consider myself, you know, a practitioner of Budo. So the best way in the world for me to die is to accept my karma in a moment of huge glory and go out fighting. And so that's what we got ahead of us. So this is good for me, right? So I'm on the side of the freedom. I'm on the side of the crypto, and I'm on the side of innovation. All right. And innovation is what's going to help us beat famine, because it's famine versus innovation. It's not that we can't produce any more calories. It's that our control structure is too static, we've got a situation of static versus dynamic is what's going on here. They're static paradigms, you know, all of their paradigms, two-party system, you know, anything you care to name. It's all part of their believing mind, and they're stuck in this static, and a believing mind must maintain that state against a dynamic changing universe, as I keep pointing out. And we're in the midst of dynamic change like no one's seen in the last 80 years, 100 years, okay? And on one level, it's 400 years. We're going through a thing now that none of our ancestors, excepting those 400 years ago, went through. And we have to survive, and we've got to take our whole civilization along with us. All they had to do was to carry fire with them.
we have a lot of work to do, that's for sure.
We got a lot of work. Now, the cool thing is we got technology now. And technology actually can help us save ourselves. I hate using that word. It can help us elevate ourselves out of our current set of obstacles, because we can magnify our own thinking with the technology, magnify our own labor with the technology, reduce mistakes, reduce resource waste, and so on with the technology. And we can get smarter, and we can get new technologies because we've got the current technologies that we have. And so we do have some huge new technologies that are offering us great potential in, for instance, even growing carbohydrates, growing crops, right? And some of them are ancient, such as the, Pieta Terra, the dark earth of the Amazon. Mm-hmm. Here is a technology that basically is charred biomass, charred wood pulp, that's been charred in a wet environment and then inoculated with bacteria. The interesting thing about it is, if you plant a seed in it, you get a 60% larger plant, 60% more production out of it than that plant provides just planted in regular dirt. And this black earth, or the black earth of the Indians, as the Portuguese describe it, is good for years. They're still using stuff that was in the Amazon now that was created maybe centuries ago. Okay, wow. And they're still using it now, and in fact, it's a treasure, and they can sell it for a premium when they come across it. But anyway, so there's another interesting fact of it is if you put fertilizer on 2 plants and you got one of them that's growing in regular dirt, you're going to get a 60% greater yield out of that plant, getting appropriate nutrients and fertilizer out of it. So we can grow plants in poor soils with external fertilizers and stuff. But even more amazing is this black earth stuff. It's already giving you that 60%. And if you give that plant fertilizer, you get 100% more production than just a regular plant. So you're getting 160% more production growing your plant in charred biomass. And for all of the nut jobs that actually think it matters, that's a way to sequester carbon. Now, the beauty of this situation is that by 2031, we won't care about carbon dioxide. You won't have any kids nattering on your case about the amount of farts you're producing, right? None of this is going to matter because we're entering into this 400-year cycle. It's an ice age. In ice ages, a very dramatic thing happens, and that is that the oceans suck carbon like you wouldn't believe. They just pull in carbon fantastically. Carbon dioxide is a trailing indicator of climate. I've known this as a studying oceanography all the way back into the 50s to the giant geophysical year that occurred in 1957. And that's why they never show you any data that predates 1960 on climate change, because it shows the true picture. And they can't have you have the true picture. They need to have you think we're in a warming spike. But that warming spike is a little tiny rise against a long trail down. And that long trail down, its near-term most recent fluctuation point was 1957 or 1956. And in 1956, there were such dramatic climate changes that the whole of the planet, led by the UN at the scientific level, created the 1957-58 geophysical year in which they examined and set benchmarks. And that's why for all these different kinds of tests, oxygen levels and all of this kind of stuff, that's why all of our data goes back that far. And from that point further back, it's different systems, it's different types of systems, and so you've got to reconcile it all. So you can't take climate data on face value. You have to understand what occurred and the static or the control versus freedom aspects of it, right? And so it was 1957 that we really started colonizing Antarctica. And they went crazy about colonizing Antarctica in 57 and 58, and it's never stopped. Anyway, so as an aside, a woo-woo aside. Okay, so getting back to our thing here, we're looking at static versus dynamic as our key indicator for these next, let's say 18 years from 2020 to 2038, okay? 2038 is the period of time when the energies from space start dropping down enough that the whole of our species that survives to that point will be able to go,
whew. We made it.
We made it. Yeah, we feel good. We're not, because during this period of time, we're going to get the energy levels jumping up intermittently, and they'll seem to, and we will see expressions of these energy levels through humanity as we go batshit crazy in various different ways and places, okay? So at the moment, we've got a situation where we're going crazy over politics here in the USA, right? And so that actually, those threads actually are starting out here in 2019, but they go through 2020, and there's a bunch of them, and they start dropping down like this by about 2028 or so. Now in 2028, 29, we have a whole series of, so this 2028, just say, okay? Okay, so we've got our political energies that there's going to be a big spike of it like that. Here's 2024. And there's going to be a big spike of political breakout in 2023. And I suspect that that's the formation of the party that will replace the Democrats. And I think it'll actually be 2, if not 3 parties. Okay, and I think that'll be the first time in American politics that we have a coalition person running as president. Running for president, okay? So it won't be an individual from the Democratic Party, it'll be an individual representing these 3 parties, at least two of which will be new, created of whole cloth.
Does that necessarily mean that Trump will most likely win the next election?
The next election? Oh yeah, it's a foregone conclusion as far as the data never showed him. Okay, so you had all these people saying that, oh, you know, prophecy, Trump, you know, ancient history, prophecy, Trump dead, you know, and all of this kind of stuff over all this time. But the data sets from way back in 2015, it just showed that we'd have an 8-year period of stability relative to the way in which the government operated, such that sci-fi world emerged out of it. It didn't say we would have political stability. It said we would have basically civil service stability as all these cracks opened up. In other words, we wouldn't go through a major change where we were firing all kinds of appointed officials and trying to replace them with other appointed officials. We would have a period of time where the civil service layer maintained some level of stability such that we get a not protection, but the stability necessary for growth, okay? Because government's going to crack open. All right, so we're in the period of time that's can be described as the destruction of the past. All of our institutions have to die in order that something can emerge and take their place that's going to keep us going through the future, because obviously these old tired things just aren't making it. And whether we accept this or not, it's going to occur, and so we just basically have to live through it. But you can harmonize with it, you can take advantage of this knowledge and do things, you can make money relative to knowing how these things occur. You know, just knowing that government's going to be breaking down can lead companies that are doing third-party contracting services to government to expand their work and take on new stuff as the government sloughs it off, that sort of thing, just off the top of my head. But all kinds of opportunities are going to bust out over this period of time, because this is, okay, so in 2024, our data sets show civilians in space. All right, not civilians like on International Space Station, but some company doing work in space with civilian workforce that goes into space on a regular basis and stays there for some period of time to do their work and then returns. In
just 4 years?
In just 4 years.
Wow.
Okay, now somewhere in this period of time in here, we have this, okay, so 2021, the sci-fi world emerges. And this is where you get your spike, okay? So in 2021, I don't have anything that's metallic and silver that would show up, but this little purple pin is basically representing the emergence in 2021 of our silver technology that was discussed back 2013, 2014, 15, and 16, in which we discover how to do something unique with silver, with a particular kind of silver. And I've got a couple of hints now that have come out of recent things within data that I can tie to those old data sets. But let me continue about this. So in 2021, we're going to get a spike of, let's just say, materials innovation. The first of the materials innovation spikes is going to occur. Over this period of time, we see these materials innovation spikes occur with some regularity as we go forward. And I'm just placing them in a random fashion along here. I'm not picking particular years. I'm just to note that we're going to go through these periods of times as our computing power and the software grows. So in 2021, we hit the first one, and that's with this silver. And it may not be until 2024 that we have working units out of that, whatever the hell this innovation is. And the innovation may actually already have happened. Okay, there's been so much language about new forms of things to do with silver in the last couple of years that any number of these fundamental discoveries could actually lead to this technological innovation that bursts out in 2021. And it may be that in 2021, we merely have an announcement that a company has a good idea and they're working on something. Or it could be in 2021, we have an announcement that they're actually producing something as a prototype. I can't say, the data just doesn't really show it, but it does show us out here in space due to whatever it is that the silver thing is, right? So the two are connected. The rise of civilians in space, the civilian workforce in space is directly tied to whatever this innovation in silver is. Now, one thing I need to divert with is that there's clear indications, whether it's linked to this or not, there's clear indications that silver is going to move into a major new role in quantum computers. Okay, the indications appear to be that they're going to come up with an idea that they can layer these containers of silver and some other metal, and basically put it on in an aerosol fashion to make the containers from which they exclude consciousness, and that they'll be able to form, if you will, an ambient universe diode. a one-way gate where they can push it out and it can't get back in, thus making the quantum computers that much more efficient and actually work that much more reliably. And that this will occur, and we'll start seeing it show up in 2021 also because of its association with silver and the new form of silver. And I think what they're going to do is somehow like selective surface layer of silver atoms, so that all the silver atoms are laid a particular way, and you could shove the consciousness out, but it can't figure out how to get back in. Something, you know, but that's just the indication on the data. But from this point on here, we have a series of predictable innovations that are going to show up relative to doing new things with materials that will lead us into the sci-fi world. And so we're in a period of time now where sci-fi world is emerging from the chaos that we're in here and in the past. And sci-fi world is going to continue to form a rising trend in our lives that will continue out through to 2038. Now this green line here, I don't know if it shows up or not.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, that's my line for ambient emotion. Okay, so this is a positive rising emotion here and release emotion here relative to our function. And so what I can do is I can show that the level of release language is going to dominate in politics until 2028 or so. However, in our period of reforming our political infrastructure, in which we go from over this period of time, and we end up with a new political parties here. Over this period of time, we then start having a counter trend, if you will, that's going to be the emergence of our new social order over this period of time. Now, that'll be the emergence of the new work ethos that's going to go through civil service, all of these kind of things. And it's going to basically originate and continue as an outgrowth of the significant political change, and it'll produce a positive result for us just about a year after we get here to civilians in space. Now, in civilians in space, we're going to have a big crisis, okay? And the crisis actually begins in 2022 and will be settled sometime by 2025. And it'll be associated with the civilians in space. And it's going to be this crisis of not being able to throw things into orbit, because it'll go on up and get smashed by a bit of debris from a previous satellite. And we'll do a bunch of these over these next couple of years, and then we'll say, oh my God, we can't launch anything. Then somebody's going to come up with a good idea that's going to lead to civilians going into space, because they'll have figured out how to get us around this. It is no coincidence that just today we learned that the Navy is patenting the flying saucer and the nuclear reactor thing, right? Because what's going to keep us alive as a species is going to be cheap energy that is going to be reliable and not require us to go out underneath a glacier and dig out coal, okay, or something along those lines. So that's interesting that we've got that appearing here in sci-fi world, because it's all powered by the new forms of energy and new interactions with that energy. And the flying saucers themselves, powered by a nuclear reactor producing an electric field, means that you don't care about the debris in space, because you've basically got a shield around you that's energetic that things will bounce off of, and you can go right through all of that. And thus, maybe that's what gets us through. Maybe we never clear up the debris field, but we just don't care because we come up with this anti-gravity thing. And that's what we're getting here in 2021, along with the spike in the political fortunes, the change in silver and so on, is we're getting into what we can think of as the anti-gravity world machining tool rollout. And that's in 2021. And that proceeds for decades. We keep doing it. We keep redoing it. Like 11 years after we do it all over again, that much better. And only this time it's the robots doing it for us. Okay. But from 2021 until 2031, we're going to have a huge growth in what we can think of as building machine tools for the sci-fi world. Okay, so we wouldn't be building the spaceships. We'd be building the tools that we'll use to stamp the spaceships out in mass, that kind of thing, or to create the nuclear reactors in mass in a robotic fashion, in a semi-clean way to do it, etc. So this is the period of time where we're building up the machine tools that will allow us to have this new form of an industrial revolution, because we're going to ultimately change all of our industry as we go robotics and AI and merge, or not merge, as bring on all of these thinking slaves. Okay, so this is one way to think about AI. AI is kind of like a vacuum cleaner. All right, so you're a woman, and the lives of women have been affected by flooring. Okay, and we know women like shoes. Okay. And it's not because there's necessarily some kind of a weird gene that says women are always going to like shoes, right? It's a practical kind of thing. All right, this is a hygiene effort. We had thrush, we've had reeds on floors, and you always get all kinds of, when we were in the Middle Ages, you get rats and all kinds of stuff in there. It wasn't hygienic. It leads to the Black Death, for instance, that sort of thing. All of these things are like hygiene. And ultimately, we get to the point where we have carpet, and thus we have to have cleaning of the carpet. And it's just a terrible thing to clean until you get electricity, and then you invent the vacuum cleaner, and you can suck up all of the dirt. And that one invention, so refrigerators, over the 40s, refrigerators and electricity cut the cancer rate in the United States in half, just by that one thing, because stomach cancer just vastly disappeared. Okay. In the 50s, we had the modern life for the housewife, and the vacuum cleaner, though, had untold number of health consequences. All right, untold number. It got rid of all different kinds of allergens. It relieved us of all different kinds of. There was a hidden factor in hygiene at a social level to the introduction of the vacuum cleaner into our lives. And the vacuum cleaner, so it was a hidden kind of a deal. We all lived with it. Cats chased it. The dog growled at it. The woman bitched at it. It was heavy and clunky and so on. But we never thought about the fact that it was eliminating all of these different kinds of diseases, and it actually increased the lifespan. As vacuum cleaners go through the society, the lifespan starts increasing on a steady basis thereafter. So AI is like that, all right? AI is the things we're going to bitch about, that damn Alexa, or my car is, flaking out or so on. But as we get better at this, as we build it and it's less clunky and so on, it's going to have a much unanticipated side effect, which is the reduction of death and suffering fundamentally. Okay. We'll have AI that will start saving people in all different kinds of things. You're in a car wreck and the AI in the car survives because of the way that it was built, and it calls 911, that kind of thing, right? Those sorts of ideas.
We don't have to worry about Arnold Schwarzenegger coming in as Terminator, taking out the human population, taking out cracking
Okay,
Bitcoin wallets or anything like that.
We do not. Okay.
Yay!
Bitcoin,
Yay!
Okay, this is all fear porn from somebody. I can't figure out their reason for doing it. That frustrates me. But no, AI only works on systems that are static. Okay, so we're back to the control versus freedom, static versus dynamic. General AI can't function in an environment that it's not trained. So you have to have a structured, trained environment for the AI to be able to recognize things. And if AI, for instance, is so stupid, it can't tell the difference between a Xerox copy of your face, a copy machine picture of your face, and your face. Okay, AI is so stupid that if you went and got some of that plasticized chrome that they put on fishing lures, and you cut out little dots, you put 4 little dots up here and 2 little dots on your cheeks, it wouldn't be able to tell you, it wouldn't be able to recognize your face. Couldn't tell you who you were from anybody else on the planet. Okay, it is that stupid. AI only works in narrow gaming kind of situations where it's working in a static field. We are AI in dynamic universe. AI can't learn. Machine learning is simply putting stuff in a database that is going to then be interacted with an already existing algorithm. The algorithm doesn't change, just the underlying data does. How well it interacts with that data is not going to be affected at all by learning. Unlike us, we learn, oh, fire hurts. I won't be doing that anymore, right?
Absolutely.
So anyway, so AI is not a threat. It's our friend. AI is going to help us out. It's already helping us out. AI has significantly increased lifespan in the United States and everywhere else it's been applied by reducing intersection collisions. Number of head-ons in collision and T-bones in collisions in intersections is way down globally. Wherever you introduce these things, it goes way down. So AI is good. The whole woo-woo community is all abuzz about belief mind making them paranoid, and therefore they got to fixate on something, and there you go, and so on. All right. I'm writing AI. AI is cool. I'm gonna really get serious about a lot of this stuff. I'm doing stuff now with React and Clojure script, so I can do front ends for web stuff. But I'm going to go on to robotics because the language is so robust and it's so easy to start doing these things. And again, AI is extremely limited, and this is to some extent very pertinent. The reason it's pertinent is because the current understanding of AI is a reflection of static versus dynamic. The people that are afraid of AI are living in a static mind. They want the world to stay, they're afraid of change. They want the world to stay the way it is so that they know what to worry about, what not to worry about. But it's also a function of those people that have a static paradigm they're trying to preserve, and they think they're going to be able to do it through the AI, the censorship people, right? And so the YouTube guys and the censorship and all of this, they're going to break down over this period of time here from up and through 2021. Thereafter, we won't have to be worrying much about censorship as an issue on platforms of anywhere. It'll be fading rapidly.
That's good.
And a lot of it's going to go simply because of the gigantic shifts in the money that are going to occur. So over this period of time here from 2020 through to 2023, 2024 will be our functional current metaphor for 1929 through 1933. Okay, so in this period of time, we will realize just how deep a shit we're in. And we'll start really grasping that we're facing an ice age, that we're facing maybe the death of half of humanity. So that means we're going to have to bury 4 billion people, okay, over these next few years. This is what we will come to realize by the time we get into 2022, 2023, and we see the absolute crisis. A hell of it is, it's in 2022, if the data is accurate, if the data is accurate, in 2022, the growing season in North America will be 30 days.
Jesus.
That's going to be your summer.
But like you said, we have technologies that could potentially get us out of that 4 billion people dying. Is that correct?
We have the technologies that potentially we can reduce the number of deaths. Okay, so we are at a climate crisis. It's not like that Swedish kid says, or any of the other kids, right? Okay, we are at a climate crisis. There will be some level of large death in the planetary population. How much we can whittle that down is unknown at this stage, but innovation is the route that will get us there. And even innovation at a personal level, okay? So we're facing famine. Well, we're facing famine now because less than 2% of our population is devoted to growing food.
Right.
All right. So instantly, and also famine is an understanding. It's a static understanding of a forecast for the future that takes into account no change. And so any change at all is going to affect. And if we get into the state of massive individual change, then we have a Cuban revolution on our hands. And I'm not talking about the revolution in the 1950s. I'm talking about the revolution when Russia withdrew the funding in the 70s from Cuba during the economic crises in the 70s, and 80% of the entire country's revenue disappeared overnight. They then developed, out of sheer willpower and intelligence, the Green Revolution of Cuba. And Cuba's got its problems, don't get me wrong. Every political system, every racial group, every collection of humans are a bunch of, we're all striving to be the batshit collective, right? But Cuba came out of it in much better shape than they went into it. When the crises happened, they were dependent for their income 80% on the generosity of the Russian people. And that went away when Russia couldn't afford it anymore, as it will happen to us. Generosity is going to go away. We will not be giving away money out of the United States past 2021. All right, there won't be foreign aid after that. And in fact, we'll be the recipients of foreign aid later on in this decade in here, when it gets really bad and the earthquakes start ramping up again and so on. But we could do, because we're smart, we got enough bald guys with brains to do the real hard work, and we can pull ourselves up just by our brains and be innovative, right? You can grow food in surprising ways and do things like this in reduced circumstances, and it is just shocking. We can grow food underground. We know a whole lot of stuff now. We're starting to get our hands around some energy, and this is what so this is the dynamic aspect that is scaring the shit out of the overlords, okay? They are on the side of static. They keep their power by things staying the way they are. You know, they regret leaving 1953. They're really pissed that we left 53, which was really the apex of the globalist elite power. And we're in a dynamic world, and they're afraid of dynamism, of the dynamics of change. So there are things we have to do. We can say to ourselves certain things, right? We can say right now that if we want to avoid nuclear war in Kashmir, we had better solve the water problem in southern India and get these guys on Amazonian dark earth, tree forest kind of building agriculture right now. And the planet needs to start producing biomass in the form of the containers of the crud. I mean, making this dark earth and over here out of our waste wood products, shoving it into giant plastic sacks and containers and sending it to India for them to bury it in the ground in 9-foot deep holes and plant seeds on top. That will go a long way towards saving, the better part of 1 billion lives, because India is actually a food source for a number of countries around it. And when they get pressed, tensions will mount, and somebody will push a button, and the next thing you know, Kashmir and parts of Himalayas and southern China are radioactive nuclear waste. And that's how it will go if we don't get our shit together. We don't start thinking as real adults, all right? And so this is something, you get old like I am. I only have a certain limited number of days left on this planet. I don't have time to waste with the fantasies and the diversionary tactics that will lead to the deaths of those people around me that I care about, because we're not paying attention. Now, we are strong. We've got really good minds. We can solve this, and we've got really good tools. We just got to do the work. Now, and so some of the things that we'll have here to aid us along is that once we get to that silver spike and we start getting into this new energy and the civilian workforces, from that point on, us guys that are paying attention, all of your audience today, will be able to say, that old bald bastard was right. We actually are going to climb out of this, because it's going to look real bad from 2021 through 2024. Okay, it'll fade off and start looking a little bit better in 2024. And then by the time we get up into the 2031s, we'll know that humanity itself as a species has a real future, as our civilization does.
Yeah. Hey, with silver, right? And I know my crowd.
Yep.
And they're like, okay, silver is going to be huge. What's going to happen to the price and all that? I have from your report. Let me read it.
Sure.
It says this is written in December of 2017. This is the metal space. These sets.
No, that was released then. So it was written over the previous 2 months.
Okay, yeah. So even before.
Right.
It's even longer forecast. All right. These sets are describing language for a large percentage price jump within precious metals as a commodity that will be temporarily ahead of markets gone wild. In this instance, the wild descriptor sets has primary supporting sets led by irregular market actions. This lead attribute set includes detailed descriptions for payment problems, market disruption, and outpouring of outrage, violating own rules, much more of the same vein. These sets all painting a picture of metal prices moving upward at an inconvenient time for market participants. I can see that happening on the COMEX at any moment, at any time between now and 2021.
Yeah. Okay. So those kind of that kind of language about price nowadays is far less interesting to me, but it is much more accurate, and it's much more likely to strike next year. Okay, yeah. Because the period of time where we have the silver innovation is the point of savior. Okay, so from 2021, that's the point of rescue. That's not the point of origination of a crisis. So we will be in the economic crises through to this period in 2021, which will probably end up being around late August, before we get this emotional uptick relative to markets and so forth with this and other breakthroughs in some nasty crises. Okay, so we've got a period of time here where we've got this, the creation of the new political parties. During that period of time, there's going to be a huge bleed out of people not giving money to the Democrats and giving money to all kinds of weird ass Democrat substitutes that they think might make it. So it'll be a huge period of chaos, and that's going to also be reflected in economic policy or financial policy coming out of Washington, especially relative to the dying of the fiat currencies. And at this point in 2024, 2025, when we've got our civilian workforce in space, then we've got at least 10% of the economy, 10% that's been swapped over to doing business via cryptos. Because some aspects of the civilians in space stuff suggests that there's going to be some level of arbitrage or negotiation or something with people on their way back from space about money, and money will transfer. So the implication is that you might be driving your space garbage truck and you've got a good load of space garbage and you're negotiating for the sale of it as you're coming back to Earth and being paid for it via cryptos. So under the circumstances, and also, by the way, all of this is indicative, not predicated upon, but indicative that the other aspects of our space economy, which include this really cool thing, which is interconnected, quantum interconnected communications. Okay, so that also emerges by 2024. Now that's actually turns out to be essentially a relatively cheap fix to get into our social order. Okay, just as it took X number of years for satellite phones to work their way down to cell phones, will take probably 3 or 4 years to go from current cell phones, and then it'll be a market model in which we have current cell phones dominating, but a new form of cell phone, which is the quantum cell phone, will be come online, and it'll probably be vastly expensive initially, but it'll be because there's no carrier. You'll never have to pay for a carrier for transport of your messages and your data, and the bandwidth will be unlimited. So what would you pay for that? Right? Yeah. If I knew right now I could buy a Galaxy phone that was quantum entangled, even if it was quantum entangled to a large server somewhere that it was acting as the gateway and passing all this stuff from the regular cell network to me, that cell phone with unlimited bandwidth, no carrier fees ever, and the ability to basically carry fiber level amounts of data through the air instantaneously. And it's instantaneous. It's much faster than radio waves. I'd spend $10,000 for it. Sure. Mm-hmm. I'd spend $10,000 for that phone. Mm-hmm. And as long as it was, rugged enough to survive my handling of them, it'd be good for 20 years. Right? Until you started wearing the molecules off the edge of it, right?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So under the circumstances, those kinds of technologies are going to be emerging. And again, it may be that silver is going to be required. All right. There was a whole lot of stuff in the data sets about silver relative to communications. And one of the aspects of it that we didn't see was this thing with the quantum machines, but now that's coming out. And then, of course, there's all of the aspects of silver and relative to health, and new kinds of devices that are coming on that are medical that are using silver. Mm-hmm. So it turns out, for instance, that no one could afford to do it, but if you could afford to replace all of the stainless steel in a hospital, exposed stainless steel in a hospital with silver, you'd reduce MRSA down to a rare exception, and you'd reduce all kinds of infections by 80 or 90%. Just by having the silver there, because it provides 10 times the microelectricity as copper. And copper, we know, actually works a lot better than stainless steel. So we're learning a lot of things as we go forward here. For instance, now we're able to generate electromagnetic currents on silver that has been taken up and encapsulated in the biotin of spores of mushrooms. Okay.
Okay.
So you ask, why would someone want to do this?
Yeah.
All right. And so all right. And so this actually gets me into something that's really cool about our coming period of time here, because I've been talking about Western world. Let's divert for a second into our Chinese cousins. Okay. You got China over there. How are they going to react to all of this? How are they going to react to the clamping down on the food supply? They got the largest population on the planet to feed. Well, these guys are not going to take the same kind of approach as us. Our approach is basically, we could just say, we're going to grow more of the same in new containers. Okay, we're going to find new ways to grow: underground storage containers, things that are shielded from the weather, lights as opposed to natural sunlight, these kind of things. We're just going to basically change our agriculture and fit it in, reacting to the circumstances around us. China, according to our data sets, is going to take an entirely different approach. They're going to grow new things to eat, not just old things that we've been used to eating in new containers. And we're actually seeing some of those. Okay, so back in 2013, I think maybe it was, we've got the first indications of DIY gene editing springing up in China and spreading through all of Asia, especially taking root in Singapore. Mm-hmm. And now we've seen that indeed, in response to the death of the pork species, of the pig species in China, 50% of all the sows are dead. So their next generation is wiped out. In response to that, the Chinese farmers are doing their own gene splicing, and they're growing pigs the size of Volkswagens. I kid you not, pigs that they can have 4 and 5 people ride if they wanted to convert it into a very weird kind of a transportation, because it isn't going to go very fast and it's going to bitch about it the whole time.
That's out of a Star Trek movie.
Exactly. So in our data sets, we had always seen all the kids in the science fairs in the schools in China as they bring in their latest DIY gene thing. Oh, well, I created a shrimp that, has beef fat in it, and each shrimp weighs 12 pounds. That kind of thing, right? So all of our response here in this period of time over this general area, we could think of as being mechanistic. But for China, for the Sino-led world, it's really going to be the DIY gene editing, genetic engineering. And so the response, so we're going to live in a very strange kind of a world where there won't be a consensus on how to approach this, right? So Russia, for instance, is going to get into the lipid business. All right. So Russia is going to get into the world of producing high-grade digestible fats for people all around the planet. And they're going to do this even though it's going to be climatically difficult to do lipid productions. But for whatever reason, the data set says that, the Russians are going to have an advantage of this and going to pursue that. We also know, for instance, that vast areas of the planet are going to change their habitats. So the Arctic and Siberia are going to warm up in spite of the fact that we're going into an ice age. Mm-hmm. As big chunks of Antarctica are going to warm up, but there's going to be a huge ice mass that's going to form off of the side of Antarctica, and sometime in this decade here will actually separate and cause reverberations on the planet. It'll be so big and cause upwelling of Antarctica that's currently suppressed by ice sitting on top of it. And it's not because the South Pole gets to be ice-free, it's because the ice in the South Pole migrates around to the side of the South Pole, so to speak, whereas the Arctic is going to get ice-free, and that's going to go to some extent through the areas in Siberia. And at the same time, there's going to be vast quantities of rain through what's now the desert region in Africa. So Africa is going to radically change as Northern Africa becomes it's no longer arid. It becomes, flash floods, vast pools of water, all different kinds of stuff going on there. And how it's going to affect China is is at this stage undetermined, but it appears that we're also going to get that same kind of an effect over the Mongolian desert areas. And it has to do with electricity, oddly enough, and how the oceans have a cluster of positive electric or positive water molecules all along the coast, and then in fact it draws the negative charged water molecules off the ocean and in towards the coast, and then even further inland, and then they ground out and they're going to fall over the desert areas, which are basically going to be massively positive and ground out this whole thing. And so here we're in a situation where, for instance, the year we get in 2022, when we get our 30-day outdoor growing season, it's going to be because we don't have hurricanes. All right. And so at that stage, we don't have the jet streams involved. The hurricanes form a part of the energy distribution of the planet. The entire purpose of a hurricane is to take heat from the equator and move it to the poles. All tropical storms, okay? All they do is they spin until they grab a bunch of heat in the form of electrically charged air molecules that are hot, and they take this stuff up to the poles to ground out and cool down. And you notice that they always ground out over land and are active over water. It has nothing to do with hot water and the temperature of the water. That's bullshit. It has to do with this trying to ground out the electrical column that is driving that vortex. Well, these are going to go away because of the climate changes that we're undergoing as part of the ice age. Doesn't mean storms are going to go away, because the storms are going to be even more horrific. And that's why this year, 2019, the winter of 2019 that we're about to enter, going in through 2020, is going to be deadly, whereas last year was brutal. So this will be the first year, and it'll mark us moving into year 0, where we will have a significant reported number of deaths due to storms. So it won't be like dying of heat in the heat problems in Spain a few years back, right? This is going to be active storms causing problems.
So this will be the rivers in the sky, the snow, the
lightning storms like we wouldn't believe. Remember, long time ago, we had a brief taste of that with all the cows dying and all of these kind of things in these high altitude. It's going to be all over the place. And it'll be the first year 0, 2020 is going to be an interesting year, because it'll be the first year that we start getting the mainstream media having to, and by that I mean as government mouthpieces, having to interact with and acknowledge the real state of our existence here, okay? Because the control will start breaking down along with the fiat dollars as famine looms, and we get to the battle between the static and the dynamic view of reality.
It's all of the above.
Correct. All of it is interrelated. Yeah. You can't remove one, and it's all interacting, right? And so they're all pumping on each other. So here's the effect. So you can look at this as a very easily split from your guys. You've got a lot of traders there. You've got a lot of guys that are proactive, that are innovators. And by guys, I mean any gender. I don't care,
we don't worry about that
any
here.
species, in any species, right? I don't care. So you've got a lot of people there that are thinkers. All right, so they're going to see this and they're going to say, I can draw a line there, and I can decide that I'll take this side right here. Now, what does that mean for me? Well, it means that, hey, that old bald bastard might finally be right and silver might pay off. But also, he might be right, as he's stated every single time since 2002, you won't want to live in a $600 an ounce silver world, because you'll remember what it was like when you didn't have this constant level of struggle. Now you'll get used to it. You'll toughen up, you'll teach your kids to be tougher, you'll survive, you'll thrive, you'll grow giant empires, you'll go out and conquer planets and all of this kind of stuff. But it's not quite the same as sitting on the beach, chugging the Mai Tai, listening to Bix strum the little ukulele with Dick, that kind of thing, right? Two different futures. Unfortunately, the beach part, well, okay, that's gone. So we got to grow up. Now in 2029, Apophis comes back. And in 2020, year 0, you'll start seeing that will be our new fear point and our new fear point, or fear porn. Apophis is going to come back, and it's either going to graze the planet and cause all kinds of huge climatic problems on its own, or it's going to kill us outright with a kill shot and so on.
Tell everybody what Apophis is.
Apophis is a big rock that's trapped in our solar system from the Kuiper belt, and it comes around every so often. It's going to zing by us in 2029. It's going to be close, but it's not going to be real close. And then in 2031, it comes back, and it's got to go through this narrow little keyhole of an opening, and it's going to go between us and the moon. So that's going to be
really,
Yeah, it's going to be spectacular. Now, will the moon and the Earth actually be on that side? Not necessarily. The moon could be over here, and Apophis is just merely going to go in a space between the orbits. Okay,
Huh.
so it doesn't actually mean it's going to pass through the interaction of the moon and the Earth. Merely that within that space, it'll be within one lunar distance.
How big is this rock?
Big enough to kill us as a planet if it
No.
hit us. Okay, it's a big bastard. So it's like, bigger
It's
than
gonna
dinosaur killers.
It's going to scare the shit out of everybody.
Exactly. And they're going to start using that to scare the shit out of you next year, because their control systems are going to be breaking down, and they need something to grab your minds, just as they grab the minds of all these poor kids with this idea of climate, with a global warming, right? And it's breaking off and falling away even as we're at that peak. So when we're at a peak of emotion with everybody getting massively whipped up, that the very next thing is going to be we're on that downside. So you're at, just like the Taoists basically say, you're at maximum inertia, your butt weighs its heaviest in the very instant before you get up and do something.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. So we're at that point here. And we're at that point with a lot of this stuff here. Now, some of the interesting things for me showing up from the data sets, just to leave you with some other positive things, is that 2 years after we have our 30-day growing season, we're already seeing production from Innotech, okay, innovative agriculture technology of some form. I don't know what it is. During that period of time, we're going to have an absolute crash in protein from the ocean. It's going to be from 2022 to 2024. It is going to be people ripping their hair out, all of the boats being sold for scrap. Every single thing you can think of as a horror relative to the fishing industry, because that's the point at which we start sucking up more carbon dioxide into the ocean, and the nature of the oceans will change over those next 50, 80, 100 years. But it will be, we've passed peak fisheries, and we're going to go into the beginning of a massive protein collapse from the oceans. Doesn't mean you won't be able to catch fish, doesn't mean there won't be a recreational fishing season, this kind of thing, but it does mean that we won't be able to feed our planet significant amounts of protein from the ocean, and it's going to affect some countries more than others. Island nations for sure, Japan, England, a lot of these, Scandinavia, all of these kind of countries are going to have serious issues. So 2020 through 2022 represents to us a metaphor, an actual analog to the 2 years without summer that convinced the German population to stop growing grain and to concentrate on root crops and cabbages as food sources. Okay, they wised up at a particular time in this last ice age cycle, 400 plus years back, and the German population in 2 years abandoned grain production that had been growing for hundreds of years, taking over more and more of their productive agriculture, and they abandoned it in a 2-year period of time and converted over successfully to root crops, and they kept the majority of their population through that period of time.
Whereas, so you're basically saying that I'm going to have to really learn how to grow my vegetables in my greenhouse better than I do now.
Oh, seriously, Guy, because every single one of us doing it. The guy in Hong Kong that's going to grow some food on his balcony or in a little niche somewhere on the side of a road.
Anywhere you find a piece of dirt, you're going to have to.
Anywhere you can do it. Yeah. And so the same conditions that created the current Japanese social structure with the farmers on top and the fishermen just right underneath them are going to reemerge in our social order. So the new mega wealthy won't be the people that are running new search engines. It'll be the people that are running giant underground grow facilities and that are producing vast numbers of calories with very minimal energy and very minimal resources thereon. And so a lot of the new wealthy are going to be kids that were trained by their pot growing farmers, fathers, growing pot illegally in strict conditions, these kind of things, because these people know how to innovate relative to agriculture. And that's what we require. And so everybody that can produce any kind of calories over these next few years will be contributing to the survival of our civilization, as well as their own survival as an individual within our very threatened species. And I didn't want to have to bring this out, but it's better that you all hear it when you're drunk.
Oh, that's right, my beer. Hey, cheers. Clif, you're awesome. Hey, before you run away, we're going to have to talk a little about Litecoin, because this is the Litecoin Summit, and it's obvious to everybody in this room that cryptos are our future. There's nobody that doubts that anymore, which is great. It's just, how will Litecoin, do you think, fit into this, where everything shapes out?
I've always, so, all right, so I'm in a bind, and I have to tell everybody this, all right? So I'm going to be perfectly legit. I have to be very minimalist on what I say, because some people have got me got my balls in a ringer, and they're threatening to squeeze them. And I don't know how far I can go in saying what, and the only clue I will have is after the fact, right? And it has to do with the regulators, and I can just let it go at that.
We don't have to talk about prices at all.
Right, exactly. Okay, and so, all right, so we have Litecoin on the innovation side of things. Okay, to some extent, Bitcoin is over there, but Bitcoin is a static within that innovation, because it's not in a position to evolve, basically. We can't really alter the blockchain. We've got so much in the way of built up reserves already invested in it. All we can do is keep it going, and that's really all we're asking of it. Litecoin is not that way. Litecoin is the kind of thing that we'll be using to negotiate those loads of space junk with the space junk transport guy on the way down to the planet. Because maybe they'll decide, okay, I'll drop it off. I'll sell you in Algiers because it'll be more valuable to you guys there. And so I'll zing over to Algiers instead of landing in Florida, that kind of thing. But so it'll be Litecoin that does that. Now, there are still killer apps yet to be developed relative to cryptos. Probably layers upon layers upon layers of killer apps. But within this 10-year period of time up through 2030, we're going to see two killer apps that will emerge that will take the underlying approach into decades and decades and decades beyond, all right? And so the killer app component of this are going to be, there's one that's really difficult to achieve, and that I don't need to get into the technical details, but it's the ability to make a decision in a distributed chain, to have that decision commit or be able to be rolled back based on the chain's condition at that time relative to that decision. So it'd be like this. It'd be like being able to make a bid on an auction off your phone using Litecoin and not worry about it, because the underlying Litecoin network is so robust, it will know that you didn't win that auction and will return the Litecoin to you without you even having to ask for it back. Sort of makes sense, right? The ability, and it's a committed transaction. If you win, they've got your Bitcoin. You can't back out of it. But everybody else, theirs is no harm, no foul. It was a try kind of a thing, right? So that's a very trivial example of a very powerful kind of technology that's going to be especially valuable in bidding situations that will emerge as the markets and stuff here crash. Okay, because bear in mind that during this period of time, okay, so the United States currency is the global reserve, and the United States power structure is the way it is because of the stability, perceived, Potemkin stability of our power structure and our currency over these past 100 years. All right, that's coming to an end. So we went through from the incept of the United States up until the point of Teddy Roosevelt. We went through one period of monetary regime, and it lasted basically approximately 100 years. Then from Teddy Roosevelt till now, we're going through another period of monetary regime that basically has taken another 100 years to die and is being replaced. Okay, so in this 100-year cycle kind of thing, there's obviously there's a period of 15 years that's very intense. We're at the tail end of that 15-year period of time as we're looking at the emergence of this new situation, okay? Economic, fiscal, financial, however you want to talk about it. It is a direct analog to what happened in Teddy Roosevelt's time, because in Teddy Roosevelt's time, we got rid of the old, which was a reliance on capital in the form of agriculture, land, livestock, slaves, ships, soldiers, et cetera, right? And we went to the new capital that was much more fast flowing, which was related to being able to send wires, that was an innovation, being able to move money across telegraph wires to other parts of the country and so on, that emerged during that period of time. And it forever altered our social order. And that technology brought in new things that we then used to build bad things like the Federal Reserve. But nonetheless, it was new technology. We're right at that point right now. And so we can think of the underlying blockchain as telegraph wires. Very much smarter, obviously much more robust, redundant, et cetera, but basically it's a conduit that allows us to do business in ways we could not do before. And so that level of innovation is now going to take over our social order the same way that the telegraph wires took over the social order in the period of time from the 1890s into, say, the 1920s. But it existed before it actually took over. Okay, before that was wire transfers, ticker tapes, stock buying and telephones and all of that, we actually had the wires being put into place and the whole infrastructure being built out, and then it could be activated. So we are still in that building out the telegraph wires, putting the wires underground, stringing them in the cities and so forth with our blockchains. But the good news for all of us guys that have seen this coming, that have seen this infrastructure emerge, the great news for all of us is that we're right at that period of time when it takes over. Mm-hmm. When the static of the fiat, the paper, it was an amazing invention to be able to have wealth stored symbolically, to hand someone else that symbol, have them accept that, and be able to create that as real wealth in their lives. So I have excess calories. I'm a farmer. I sell those excess calories. I have a piece of paper. I give it to somebody else in exchange for a horse or whatever. But that other person gets that piece of paper as a symbol, is able to go through that backward conversion and convert it back into calories in their environment. It's all about calories. So we're now in that situation where we're going to drop the actual physical stuff because it's too slow, it's too clumsy, costs too much, and it's too prone to error. And we're going to get that much better. So now we're going to have artificial intelligence relative to money and relative to all other aspects of our how we manage things, of humanity. And I think it'll actually be really cool. Okay, and I'm really looking forward to my next sojourn as a human, coming back in 3,000 years or so to see what we've actually been able to accomplish here for those 3,000 years, right? Because that's the way I look at it. And if you look at it this way, it's not really a bad thing to face challenges at the end of one's life, right? I would have preferred to, have had the last years of my life sitting on the beach, listening to Bix sing and smoking dabs, right? But it's not a bad thing to go out the way that I'm going to be going out, because what I'm doing is I'm working very diligently in these last few years to plant the seeds such that my next life will be able to inherit those seeds and go that much further, right? And so we can all do this. We can all change the social order we're involved in by getting on the right side of our static versus dynamic equation. And if you're into the dynamic aspect of it, in my way of thinking, it's very much like Aikido, which is, it's not like static. It's not like you stand there and slug. You wait till someone throws a punch at you and then you take their energy and you pull it. And so it's very much more dynamic, flowing, and so on. It's the dance with universe. And we're at just a really cool part of time now, because we're going to have Litecoin and all of these others come up with some serious innovations. And we're going to see cryptos. You'll have your Litecoin card, or maybe you'll have your Litecoin cash on your phone, or however we're going to be transporting it back and forth. And I think we will innovate. I think we will certainly come out of this. And I think it's going to be horrific and hellacious and so on, but we don't have to necessarily concentrate on that part of it, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the really cool part, before we go just sci-fi kind of thing, is we've got 2024, the data suggests that we've got 6 of these Oumuamua or Borisov things coming through all at once as a gang, one after the other. And that proves to us that it's an intelligent design, because they're all on a flight path. And then we see that our sun is being used as a subway tunnel, as a sling to shoot these things for some other social or some other thing.
Wow.
But that's our second contact, because we've actually had first contact with UFOs. And that was the Nimitz, where we have our government acknowledging that they had first contact with UFOs interacting with them. You know, no bullshit, no Corey Good stories, none of that, real stuff. And then we have in 2029, we have 3 cruisers that also come in at the same time. And cruisers are good. I'm defining them differently, okay? 3 cruisers are different than the Oumuamua things that come on in and sling out, because these guys are going to hang around for a while and then take
just
off.
For everybody, these are alien spacecraft, shall we say?
Exactly. Not made by humans, coming from outside our solar system.
That's so cool.
We won't necessarily be able to talk to them, and they won't necessarily give a shit about us, right? You know, why should they care about the ants on Earth? We don't know what they're here for, but they're not here for us. But nonetheless, it'll be cool as hell. That
is amazing, and unbelievable conversation. Everybody give Clif a hand. I would really like to read the last paragraph of this report that I've read a million times. And it is the Soaring 20s report. You can get it at halfpasthuman.com. And here's the last paragraph. It says, these next 2 years leading into the spring Soaring 20s decade will be turbulent, temporal flying on crossing currents colliding constantly. These collisions may be counted upon to induce vortex formations, drawing in power, influence, and cryptocurrencies. Plot your flying appropriately, obey the posted speed limits, and always follow the minimum altitude requirements. More power to you. Happy hodler days, Clif High. Bravo, Clif. So awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clif, and we will see you very soon.
Yes. Okay.